So guys, let me give you a brief intro on Donna Lopez. If you haven't met with her, if you haven't seen her before, if you haven't talked with her, I mean, she is the best person to buy a drink and just like talk beauty with. She will tell you.
I love tequila. I love tequila. Margaritas, please, if we're going to have a drink.
Absolutely. So guys, Donna is an innovator. She's a visionary, a disruptor, a creator, storyteller, and a brand builder. She's the founder and CEO of Making Lemonade. She's an experienced brand developer, having worked with literally thousands of influencers and built dozens of brands through her work on HSN, Home Shopping Network, and with BoxyCharm. She is a multifaceted beauty executive with a distinct retail and marketing background as a tenured storyteller, brand marketer, and brand developer. Donna, I will let you take it away and just start doing what you do best, which is tell us what is the future of beauty.
Wow. Well, I guess I can just go home because that intro was great. So as Derek mentioned, I was the former vice president of merchandising for BoxyCharm. And, I have a long history with, building businesses and building brands. I was blessed enough to be part of the Home Shopping Network and be a head buyer there in color and fragrance and bath and body and pretty much everything you can imagine. So I have literally touched almost every brand that's out there, and I love that. And the reason why I kind of went out on my own to create Making Lemonade, my company is a brand development company. And what I wanted to do, and one of the things that I felt was a little bit lacking, within me and my space and in my roles, was that I would always find brands wanting to do more, right? And as the retailer, you can only do so much, and you have certain brand limitations that you have to do. And I just love to get my hands dirty with the brands. And I thought, what better way to, make an impact on the industry than to get in with every single brand that I can and teach them to take their power back so they're not super reliant on retailers and, boxes and every other marketing channel that there is out there, that they can take some of that power back and scale their businesses in the way that we were able to within the retail space. And it's been a hell of a ride and so much fun. And I'm really excited to kind of share with you a little bit about obviously my learnings and some of the things that I do I work with brands and the ways that I help them to connect with their consumer in a more authentic way. Now, if you've been in this industry for longer than a couple of years, you know that the two most overused words in the beauty industry are authenticity and storytelling. Everybody talks about it, and it's amazing how many brands and retailers still miss the mark on authenticity and storytelling. And when I really got to the bottom of that research, what I really found was that the main issue was that brands and retailers were struggling to know how to connect with their consumer. So connection is a huge point of passion for me, because if you don't connect with your consumer in a way that is relevant to her, it doesn't really matter what product you have or what kind of content you're putting out there. If you're not speaking to her in her love language or him in his love language, you don't have a community anymore. So it's really important that you know how to connect with your consumer. And it sounds like such a very simple topic, but it's actually one that I've built a business off of, because there are so many brands that really struggle with understanding that. And really how I try to position it to all of my brands is connection is the new influence. Influencers are a key part, and obviously I have built many companies, including BoxyCharm, off of a strong, powerful influencer strategy. But just going to any influencer or building out and going to the top 10, most powerful, largest following influencers will only get you so far. Because, the influencer landscape is changing, which I'm sure you will hear a lot about that throughout the day. So my whole point of, differentiation and how I work with brands, and really what I'm going to share with you today, is how to get to the core of your connection with your customer. And some of these things sound very simple, but I'm going to give you some examples within each point that kind of bring a little bit of life to what I'm saying. So I'm going to start with the fact that you cannot connect with anybody in this world unless you really know who you are, right? And I think with brands, one of the biggest keys is not only knowing who you are as a brand, but it's also knowing who you're not. I took on a client last year that had an incredible following, millions of followers on social media, and had the lowest engagement out of any of their competitors. Every single one. They were probably 1/3 of the engagement, the conversation that any of their competitors had. And the reason for that was I would look at their feed, their brand is really known. And the reason why they got to the millions of followers that they did is that they are the quirky, colorful, fun brand at an extremely affordable price, but you're getting the quality of, a brand that you would find in Sephora. And they weren't leaning into that. What they were leaning into was, I looked on their social feeds and all of their marketing collateral, and it basically looked like a Fenty campaign met a Revolve campaign came together, and that was what the story that they were putting out into the market. And they had essentially lost their entire community. I mean, you would have imagine having 3 million followers and getting maybe 500 likes and a few comments on every post. That's not a strong moment for this brand. So it was really important that we took that learning and said, okay, you know who you are. You are a quirky, fun, colorful brand. Lean into that, go back to your grassroots, and know who you're not. You are not Fenty and you are not Revolve. So let's really understand the content that we're putting out there. Just because it's trending for many brands doesn't mean that it will trend for you. And so it's extremely important that you really know and understand who you are, but you just as importantly understand who you're not. So what I did in that moment was I sent their social media team out into a parking lot, an actual parking lot, and I said, go shoot content. Forget all of the expensive, creative photography studio, everything that you did, and I want you to go shoot 50% of your content needs to be shot in this parking lot. And amazingly enough, I got a lot of pushback, obviously, initially, especially from the board of directors. And I said, just trust that this is who your customer is. She wants to see something that is relatable to her. She wants to see the formula of the product coming to life. She doesn't want to see somebody in, a beautiful, 1950s car looking like a fashion campaign. She wants to see what this product actually does and why it's so special. It's so special because the quality is impeccable and the price is unbelievable. So how do we bring that story to life? So after sending them into the parking lot to shoot all of this amazing content, they not only had an increase in following, an increase in sales, an increase in product sentiment, they had really re-engaged their community. People who hadn't been seeing their posts for a long time, people who had not been engaging with their brand in a long time, were commenting, were posting, their UGC increased. Basically, the entire brand lifted because they really understood who they were and what their audience wanted to see. And it was really important learning because, they had actually stunted in growth in social. So they had a huge following and had just assumed that because they have a huge following now that they're good. And the reality was that they had not engaged that audience in a very long time, A, and B, they had not connected with her to inspire her to want to talk about the brand in a valuable way. Yeah, they threw up a meme and got maybe 100,000 comments or likes, but it was not moving the needle for them because they were not speaking to her in an authentic way. And so once we made these strategic moves and getting the content to really speak to who the brand is and not really worrying about what was going on with Fenty and all of these other incredible brands that I love and respect, once we stopped the knowledge of, all of this brand guidelines coming into play, we were able to speak from an authentic point of view. And that's when we were able to see the increases. In 3 months, they grew, after 6 months of no growth, they grew 300,000 in following, which is a huge number, especially when they already have a significant following. Additionally, their engagement increased by 243% in 3 months. And they also had their first viral post, which got over 1 million views and over 3,000 comments. And lastly, and most importantly, they increased in sales. A brand that was declining for about a year in the double digits were now increasing up 10, 20, 30%. So it's really impactful when you take these moments to connect with your consumer. And when you start from the position of owning who you are as a brand and not worrying about everything else that's happening around you, you can really break through and disrupt in a more meaningful way and actually connecting with your audience. Now that brings me to the next point, which is know thy audience and speak their love language. So this is something that I speak to a lot. And when you're talking about speaking their love language, Obviously when you're a brander or a brand developer, or when you're a marketer, your job is to ensure that the brand positioning, the brand voice, the brand marketing is all being communicated properly, right? But if you forget who your audience is, you can miss very distinct opportunities to distort your brand in a different manner. Another great example I have of that is the first thing that I do when I take on a new client is I pull obviously a number of data points. Of course, there's social listening and consumer data and trend data, and I pull all of this data, right? But the very first thing I do before I do any of that is I look at the brand's UGC. So I go straight to the source. I go straight to the customer. Who is currently sharing your brand? Who is currently talking about your brand? And what are they saying? And who are they? And you find these are really amazing nuggets of opportunity when you spend a lot of time, and both my team and I, and even though it's a very manual process at times, it's extremely impactful because you can really dive deep into understanding who she is beyond the number that sits on a piece of paper and your dashboard, right? So one very great example that I have of that is I took on a client earlier this year, and when I started diving through their UGC, I noticed that there was a lot of Latinx consumers. I mean, just overflowing. And so I had asked, about their distribution, if there was any particular reason, if they had done a campaign, and they actually looked at me and said, no, they didn't really know why. And the truth was when we dove deeper into that, because I had that little nugget of information, we then dove deeper into that and realized that this was a humongous market that they hadn't even tapped into yet. So we took that moment, what I call the lemons of your business, right? Because my whole company is based on making lemonade, finding the lemons in your business, distorting it to make the most delicious lemonade possible. And the reason why I really go through this process is because once I can find this lemon, we can find an opportunity to go into a new path or to expand or diversify your audience or speak to her in her language. So we have this really amazing opportunity with the Latinx community, which they had not even touched. So I looked at their influencer strategy and I said, why don't we try this? For the next couple of campaigns, let's take a portion of the budget and let's allocate it towards the Latinx community. So let's target it with the largest, Latinx influencers, take a good portion of that budget, which of course everyone was concerned, worried, are we gonna hit the right demographic? And what was really incredible about that was that they had a really strong influencer performance, but they were seeing a lot of results in earned media value, but they were not actually seeing a lot of results in conversion. So it was something that I wanted to test beyond just sort of, let's see what happens. I really wanted to dive deep into it. So I was able to, kind of go back to my roots with, my BoxyCharm days and reach out to my influencers and my contacts. And I was able to bring them a pool of Latinx influencers that they could reach out to and that we could send PR to, and in some cases pay. In some cases we, had a great relationship, so we were able to get them at a, either a great price or to do it, just on a commission base only. And we had unbelievable results. So we did this campaign, and where they would normally get $1 million in EMV, they got $5 million in EMV. Additionally, they had the Latinx influencers had the highest conversion rate of any of the influencers within their campaigns. In the history of their campaigns, the Latinx bucket was performing at the highest and generating the most sales. So there was a huge opportunity and sales lift that they were missing because they didn't even know the audience that they were speaking to, and they didn't really know how to get to the bottom of how do I market to this individual and how do I speak to her in a language that makes sense to her. And when I say language, I don't mean like literal language, although in this case in particular, we did speak to her in her language because we targeted Latinx Spanish-speaking influencers. And in some cases, like with BoxyCharm, we saw a humongous opportunity with Latinx. And so we had created an entire social media account that was dedicated to the Latinx community, and we speak to her in Spanish, and it actually became a higher point of engagement for us, and additionally drove more subscribers for us than even our standard channel. So it's pretty amazing to see how, speaking to her in her language literally made a humongous business difference, but also understanding, taking those moments to really look at your user-generated content to see beyond the numbers and see who is talking about your brand. And when you go back and you look at how you're communicating with her in your various touch points, you can obviously speak to her in your brand voice, but how are you speaking her love language? And how are you speaking her consumer language? Are you identifying with her? Are you connecting with her in a way that resonates with her? If you find out that, 30% of your consumers are moms and you're not talking about being a mom ever, then that's a huge missed opportunity. There's opportunities to really connect with your customer on a deeper level, which is really what's driving a lot of brand loyalty these days. And especially, and as you all know, if you're in this industry, transparency, connection is all key to being authentic, because they can smell it sort of a mile away if they don't connect with it, or if it's not being authentically spoken to in a way that resonates with her. So she can really identify what's working for her and what's not in any way. So speaking also to that point, we talked about in the beginning that authenticity is a very overused term. And again, for you to be authentic, you have to really know who you are, know who you're not. You have to know your audience and speak not only in your brand voice, but also in their love language. And then next, you have sort of how do you play into a trend, right? Because if you're a brand, you obviously have to play into trends. It's inevitable. No matter what, you have to play into the trends to be relevant. Now, the key here is, how do you understand the difference between a strike it trend and a lasting trend? And those are the things that I like to break down for my brands. And basically, as I break it down into two categories, it helps them to better understand how they play into it. So as an example, a strike it trend could be a Super Bowl meme that's going viral that you want to jump on immediately. And you have to have the team in place to be able to jump on those things to drive relevancy. Okay, so those are the things that are strike it trends. A quick trending way that you apply a product. Everyone remembers like when people were taking like eggs and like putting foundation on, like actual eggs, and applying on YouTube and on Instagram. These are the things that you wouldn't always play into, but the things that you can actually use to sort of distort a little bit of relevancy for your brand. But there's also the lasting trends, which obviously go on for a longer period of time, which I know that you guys we have some speakers coming up later that are going to talk about sort of the long-term trends of beauty. So I don't want to go too far into that and steal their thunder. But at the end of the day, the lasting trends could be, if you've been in this industry for longer than a couple of years, trend is really a cycle at the end of the day. You can predict trend actually fairly easily, which I know a lot of trend forecasters are like, no. But the reality is, if you've been in this industry, you can, predict trend from a product perspective fairly simply. And obviously for me being a merchant, that was a big portion of my job, was to watch the trends and obviously monitor the cycles, track them, and then obviously predict the cycle at which they would turn and how, this would impact, the product, the market, the industry, etc. And some of those trends that are amplified by influencers or something that goes viral, those are moments that do happen, that do influence the trend slightly. But when it comes down to product, it really is pretty predictable by a trend cycle. So, when you're watching the trend cycle, whether it's makeup, skincare, hair care, whatever the case may be, you're watching the market shift, and we're really in a pivotal time. The consumers, we really oversaturated them with color. We obviously oversaturated them with eyeshadow palettes, blushes, highlighters. I mean, anything that could get a good swatch, we saturated with, because we obviously knew the power of the user-generated content and how that really drives virality for your brand, but also drives sort of what I would consider FOMO. So from that FOMO point of view, that drives an urgency to purchase because you can't live without it, right? It sparks an emotion. Now, with that being said, you also have to monitor the lasting trends that are happening, such as, the shift from going very color heavy and now seeing the shift into complexion. And why is that shift happening? Well, you see the color trend declining, and you see the skincare trend uprising. And so therefore that impacts sort of how they're viewing their makeup collection as well. So when you watch the correlation between the trends, you can really start to predict them. And then that's where you can see where you fit into these trends. And that's really the next key piece to what I wanted to talk about, because, obviously a big part of what I do and my love will always be creating product. It's probably my favorite part, and my favorite moment is when people hire me to create product for them and help them ideate a product pipeline, because it's really what I'm most passionate about, because I take all of these learnings and then develop a product, basically a product pipeline to help for the next 12 to 18 months based on the trends, based on your market, and based on where you fit into this. And it's really my favorite part. And the reason for that is because, you can really impact and shift. And Derek had mentioned it before, you can shift the market based on what you create. And there's a very well-known quote that, if you want to predict the future, you should create it, right? So if you create the trend, you can then get ahead of it, and then you're the one that's a leader in, in the industry, which is amazing. Not always easy to do, to be fair, but if you get ahead of it, you can actually do that. So where do you fit into these trends? If you're a heavy makeup brand, how do you play in the skincare natural, maybe you're not a natural brand. Again, you have to own who you are and understand how you fit into these trends. So how do you infuse more natural ingredients into your products? How do you become a little bit more sustainable and a little bit more earth friendly? How do you find these moments to play within the trend without going against everything who you are? Now, it might be a case that maybe your brand is so far off that you do need to make a rebrand or a shift and shift the market. Those are obviously big and very expensive decisions, but sometimes they are necessary. I have a couple of brands that I'm doing that with right now, and it is for sure a process. So I understand why that can be a really big challenge. But again, that comes back to self-awareness and knowing who you are as a brand and knowing who you're not and what you're capable of doing and how you can really bring this brand to life. And then the last piece that I really want to talk about is no limits with being on brand. So this is something I always call the kiss of death, is when a brand comes to me and says, well, that's not on brand for me. And I talk a lot about branding very broadly because I believe that branding, while it's important to have your brand positioning, your brand voice, and everything that you stand for, it's equally as important to know who your audience is and connect with your audience and connect with your customer. And sometimes that means a little bit of flexibility in the way that you present your branding. So it's not that I'm saying to go against who your brand is. What I'm saying is to bring your perspective to a platform that's relevant to him or her. So from the perspective of, I'll use the TikTok example. So I was lucky enough to be part of the viral TikTok campaign. I collaborated with Movers and Shakers, who you're going to hear from later today, who is amazing. Hire him. He's incredible. I love their team so much. But I was very, very blessed to have been brought in as sort of the Gen Z TikTok industry expert to kind of bring this, help them to bring this campaign to life. They did an unbelievable, phenomenal job and really took it to something that I couldn't even predict myself. As somebody who predicts trends, I could have never predicted what they did. But one of the things that we said from the beginning was, we have to understand the TikTok platform, okay? This is not going to be bringing your Instagram content or your branded content to TikTok and thinking that it's going to perform. So again, when you're talking about being on brand, and I hear this and I have heard this for many, many years because I was a buyer, and anybody who is in the audience that is a buyer or a merchant can understand this. You hear the same brand story day in and day out, and every brand that comes to you thinks that they have a unique point of difference. And a lot of times that's not true, sadly. However, there are a lot of incredible brands that have amazing brand stories, but they're so focused at being on brand that they don't allow themselves outside the limits of what that means to be in your brand box, right? So when you're talking about knowing where to go where none or few have gone before. That's like probably one of the best pieces of advice that I give to any brand that I work with, is go where none or few have gone before. And one of the biggest challenges of that is getting budget approved, right? So we all know that we have these realities of, we don't know what this is going to do. We don't know we should invest in this. But the reality is you have to try. And sometimes you have to take that leap of faith and say, yeah, you know what? This isn't really on brand. And when I'm looking at this content, it doesn't look like anything that my brand would do, but I want to bring my perspective to this platform. So how do I basically take who we are, bring my perspective in a way that speaks to this audience, right? So in the example of TikTok, which I'm not going to take too much away from this because I want, obviously, Evan will blow your minds with everything he's going to tell you later. But one of the things that we really did was dive really deep into who is sharing on TikTok. What are they doing? What are these creators doing? Who are the most popular influencers on TikTok? And, it was really interesting because when you're working with a brand who has such an incredible brand identity like e.l.f., they really had a very specific point of view that, of course, we needed to bring to life for them. And like I said, Movers and Shakers did a phenomenal job doing that. With that being said, it was incredibly important that we took the moment to really honor who TikTok was and say, this is not produced. This is not going to be something that we're going to put a branded campaign necessarily in. We're going to take that leap of faith and go where no one has gone before and say, we're going to blow this up. And we leaned in really heavily, and e.l.f. it leaned in extraordinarily heavy into this and took a humongous leap of faith. And because of that, they had overwhelming success. I know Derek mentioned it at the beginning, but they had over 4 billion views. It's the largest campaign in TikTok history. And now they're basically booked up. Like there's so many people that are now, we really trended TikTok, and the Movers and Shakers team did such a phenomenal job bringing that to life with Elf Cosmetics, that they really brought their perspective to TikTok. And if they had not said, okay, you know what, this is not on brand for us, we have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to do it anyway. And what we are going to do is bring in all the people that do know what to do with it. They wouldn't have the success that they did. And I read an article the other day that they actually had an increase in their stock, like their stock increase, and they actually credited it on their earnings call to part of the TikTok campaign. That's how phenomenally impactful this campaign was. And so I say this a lot because now I see all of these brands trying to jump on TikTok, but now it's saturated. So now people are really starting to get in, and it's still time. There's still time to get in and to go for it. But it's really important that you take these moments in the industry and see where these little, basically these little windows are that you can go through, and you can say, yes, I'm going to go here because nobody else has gone here yet. And let's see what can happen. Another great example I have of that is when I first started at BoxyCharm, the team had started to work with, or they had already been in talks with bringing on Cardi B as an ambassador. And every brand that I told this to, because I was excited, I thought it was a great, really unique moment. This is kind of right when she was just first starting to take off. And I remember saying to everybody, telling all the brands, and I had such terrible response from the brands. They were like, we don't want to have any part of that. We don't want her to talk about our product. We don't want any of that. And the reality became that she converted like you would not believe. And it was amazing to watch how she converted as Cardi B, because the first thing I got back was, well, why aren't you going after, this influencer or that influencer? And we said, we're going to try Cardi B and see what happens. And, one of the amazing things about BoxyCharm that they do so well is that they go where nobody else has gone before, and they're not afraid to try new things, and they're not afraid to take the risk and say, let's see what happens. And sometimes you have to kind of forget brand and just jump in. And really, to me, those are like the 4 things that really bring an authentic connection between you and the brand and your consumer, and bringing all of those together and saying, hey, what's on brand is great, but what is on brand and is relevant to her or him is more important. And so those are really the 4 main pillars that I really talk about when it comes to connection. And it's been amazing to chat with you guys. And I don't know what kind of happens next. I guess Derek takes it from here. But I'm
yeah, that was
done.
Awesome. Here, list the pillars for me one more time. I want to make sure I have them written down here.
Of course. Know who you are and know who you are not. That's number 1.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Know thy audience and speak their love language.
Love it.
Learn how to play into a trend with authenticity.
And finally,
forget being on brand and go where none have gone before.
I love it. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And with that Cardi B one, that's a sensitive subject for me. I think you and I were on separate sides of that for a minute, where you were thinking that it was a bad idea. And
No.
I was trying to tell, I was trying to tell the whole company when we were working together on this, that it was, like you said, converting like crazy. It just worked really well. It was small and simple. And to speak about being on brand, here was a big concern. The video that she'd shot had poor lighting. It was done with a cell phone, and it was like really raw and ugly. It wasn't like a professional shot video. And so BoxyCharm is saying, this isn't a video that's really on brand for us. And I'm like, but guys, people are loving it. It ended up becoming, I spent a lot of money in ads on that video, and it worked extremely well. Let's just say
it was a great video. No, I was all about the Cardi B partnership, but I do recall there being a lot of conversation where we saw a lot of pushback was actually from the brand partners, that they didn't want their brand being featured. And, I said, well, it's happening. And then they were very grateful afterwards.
Who's going to talk about you and what they're going to say. What you want to control is the sentiment that you bring to the table, right? And
of course.
And so I think that's an important lesson. One real quick question from John. John said, back to when you were talking about testing Latin audiences, did you, and this is actually maybe more for me, did you test ads for the Latin audiences first and maybe some A/B testing for conversion optimization before going out to the Latin influencers? So I think you probably know the influencer side a little bit better than me. Why don't you start there, and I can talk a little bit to the
of course. So sometimes when you find these moments, right, where you have, you see an opportunity and you say, okay, I could go through like a long list of testing to see what happens, or I can just, again, throw in and see what's going to happen. And influencers are a great way to do that because they have such unique audiences than, say, going after like a paid audience, which I'm going to let you speak to because that is so your world. But, going after an influencer audience is where you drive that authenticity. So I'm a little less frugal, I would say, when it comes to, going after some Latinx influencers because they already had a substantial budget. So I actually didn't spend any more. What I did was I diversified the budget. So instead of saying, okay, well, I'm going to ask for an extra $1 million to go after Latinx, what I did was I diversified their current budget and just made them a bigger percentage because at the time they only had 1 or 2 Latinx influencers who were, performing well, but they were so small that they really didn't have an opportunity to get wind beneath their wings. So what I did was I just spread that budget and then took it away from other influencers, and we saw much, much larger results. At that point, then we developed a longer term strategy once we saw what I call proof of life. And then I used that to develop a longer term strategy, which include a larger influencer spend for Latinx, an actual Latinx campaign. And then obviously we did a whole paid strategy surrounding it as well. And then
I think one of our influencer managers was completely dedicated to the Latin market at one point. So.
Oh yes, at BoxyCharm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think, like, to give you an idea of the size of it, there's I think 4 people in the influencer department or something along those lines. So it is a full-time job booking influencers. And from my side of it, I saw misses. So I saw us put money into an influencer and have no result. And so when it comes to A/B testing, or I think of each influencer as an A/B test, essentially, I think they'll talk about this a little later, so I won't get too much into it, but you really need to understand where their audience is and their audience profile. So we spent a lot of money on an influencer who had a 90% Latin America, so literally in Latin America following. And it was also too heavily like male. Men were interested in following her because she was beautiful, as opposed to women in beauty following. And so with that campaign, we saw a huge spike in traffic from Latin American countries, but we can't sell a product to them, people in those countries. So we literally, from a conversion standpoint, had no conversions. And we also we missed an opportunity so from an international expansion standpoint, which we won't talk about too much here today, we could have looked to drive them to a separate website and ask them for their email address, possibly even their mailing address, and said, you are now on the waiting list for BoxyCharm Latin America, or something along those lines. And we just didn't know that this kind of traffic was about to hit us. So we didn't really prepare in that way. And that's what I think is like a baby step towards our influencer talk later today at the end of
and I think just to kind of further on that, because I think to be clear, you're talking about a campaign that happened specifically with BoxyCharm. I'm talking about a campaign with another brand, just that way people know we're talking about 2 separate campaigns.
Yeah.
But, I think that was such a great point. And again, it goes back to know thy audience and know their love language, because you have to also do the same thing for your influencers. So to your point, what a great point that, if you have this beautiful, amazing influencer and a big portion of her following is really just men, wanting to look at her in a bikini, it's probably not going to get you very far. So it's really, really important to be thoughtful with the types of influencers that you're going after and understanding. So that's why we went after the very specific beauty influencers. Like I called, one of my good friends who manages Roxy Bella, who is a very, very well-known Latinx influencer, and she converts like crazy. If anybody wants to know, she's amazing. I can definitely hook you up with her, but she is unbelievable. And so she was one of the driving forces surrounding sort of her actual conversion, which was amazing.
Love it. Awesome. Donna, we're going to move right into Yarden's Talk. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Guys, if you have more questions for Donna, where can they find you? What's a good email address?
Yeah, so you can find me at donna@makinglemonade.co.
Gotcha. I'll share that
You
here.
can also send me a DM on Instagram if you'd like at Color Me Donna, color with a U.
Color.
For some reason, I get a lot of clients who reach out to me on Instagram, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna share right here, and I'll make sure that we have that for everybody here. So
perfect.
Get this.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and it was lovely to see your face, Derek. I miss you. We used to sit in the same office.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. We shared one of the offices. That's right.
We shared a little office for a while. Yeah, it was awesome. Fun. Good times. All right, bye, guys.
Bye.